If we say what a country fears most is not foreign invasion, but its own military turning its guns, then America seems to be a miracle. Many regimes globally have collapsed in military coups. But in this country with the world's strongest military, in nearly 250 years, it has never once staged a military coup. So, why is this? Is the system too robust? Or are the soldiers too obedient? Today, let's talk about why America's guns always obey the pen. Looking around the world, when we open the history of Thailand, Myanmar, Pakistan, Sudan, Chile, Argentina, and other countries, or browse current news, we will find countless countries have staged this scene. Military tanks surrounding the presidential palace. Generals appearing on television screens, announcing the suspension of the constitution. The elected government forced to surrender power at gunpoint. Military coup. This cruel and recurring reality has long been a part of world politics. And America. This country possesses history's most advanced military force in human history. Its fighter jets, warships, and soldiers are spread across every corner of the globe. Theoretically speaking, if the U.S. military wanted to, within just a few hours, it could overthrow any elected government in the country. But the reality is, in nearly 250 years of history, even after experiencing the brutal internal conflict of the Civil War, America has never had a single successful military coup. Not even a large-scale coup plot or major attempt has ever occurred. This country, often accused of interfering in other nations' regime changes, its own government stability has never been threatened by its own military. What invisible barrier is protecting America's democratic system, saving it from destruction at the hands of the military? The core and most fundamental reason why America has never had a military coup is actually hidden in the nation's very beginning. Hidden in the political philosophy of the Founding Fathers. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and others were all deep students of European history. In the historical records, they witnessed during the Roman Republic how generals like Julius Caesar used their armies to seize power. They also saw England's Oliver Cromwell and other military leaders overthrow elected governments. It was these historical lessons that filled them with a deep distrust and fear of the concept of a large, standing army. In their view, a large-scale, professional army was the greatest threat to the republican system and democratic freedoms. Because the army's power and discipline could easily propel an ambitious general onto the throne of a dictator. Out of this deep-seated vigilance, the Founding Fathers, when designing the U.S. Constitution and every level of the governance system, constructed an extraordinary and far-sighted framework aimed at placing military power firmly under the strict control of civilian authority. For example, under Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution, the commander-in-chief of the nation's armed forces is the president, an elected civilian leader. Not any general or admiral. This means the military's ultimate orders come from a politician accountable to the people. Any general who defies a presidential order would be committing a direct act of treason. But the Founding Fathers did not place the power to control the military entirely in the hands of the president alone. They went further and designed a mechanism for the separation of powers. According to Article 1 of the Constitution, only Congress has the power to declare war, though this rule has often been bypassed in U.S. history. More critically, Congress holds the power of the purse. Only Congress can approve the military budget, determine the number of soldiers, and appropriate funds for new weapons. And according to the Constitution, appropriations for the Army cannot be for a term longer than 2 years. This means the Army's survival and supplies must continually depend on the support of the elected legislature. Furthermore, the Second Amendment, often controversial for its individual gun rights, its original context also stemmed from a mistrust of standing armies. America's founders hoped the core of national defense would be a well-regulated militia, an armed group composed of ordinary citizens. In their vision, a society where all citizens are soldiers was both the ultimate defense against tyranny and the last line of defense against an invading army. Although the concept of the militia later evolved into the National Guard, the core idea behind it, not centralizing military power, but dispersing it among the people, has always remained. These constitutional barriers, the president's civilian leadership, Congress's financial control, the decentralization and balance of power, together built a solid foundation. ensuring the U.S. military would always be the nation's tool, and not its master. Beyond the constitutional armor, the U.S. military's own complex and deliberately designed decentralized architecture also makes a military coup nearly impossible. In many countries around the world, the military is a single, centralized, and homogeneous institution, but in the United States, the armed forces are split into multiple independent branches, making it difficult for them to unite in action against the government. The U.S. Armed Forces are not a single entity. Today, it consists of 6 independent branches: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Space Force, and Coast Guard. Each branch has its own command structure, budget, culture, and even its own institutional interests. Historically, there has been healthy competition between these branches and sometimes unhealthy friction. For an Army general to persuade a Navy admiral or an Air Force general to jointly participate in a coup is almost unthinkable. Inside the Pentagon, this institutional separation and balance of power makes it difficult for any single service branch to control the entire military machine. And within the U.S. military architecture, one of the most unique components is the National Guard. The National Guard is not a federal army, it is essentially each state's own armed militia. The commander-in-chief of each state's National Guard is that state's governor, not the President of the United States. This means America has 50 National Guard forces subordinate to different governors. Although the President can mobilize the National Guard during a federal emergency, under normal circumstances, they are entirely controlled by the state government. If a part of the federal military were to rebel, the state governors could deploy their state's National Guard to suppress the rebellion. This mechanism disperses military power into the hands of the states, achieving an extreme decentralization of power. Beyond this, outside of the U.S. military system, there exists a vast and broad network of armed forces also under civilian control. For example, the Department of Homeland Security, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, the DEA, and countless other federal agencies all have their own armed units. Add to that each state's state police, each county's sheriff's office, and each city's police department. There are approximately 18,000 independent law enforcement agencies in the U.S. This complex and multi-layered architecture completely eliminates any single center of power within the U.S. Armed Forces. To launch a coup, plotters must not only coordinate the various branches within the military but also contend with the National Guard and the potential resistance from thousands of independent law enforcement agencies. This structural division is precisely the most powerful real-world barrier America has against a coup. Perhaps even more powerful than the Constitution, laws, and institutional architecture is the invisible wall engraved in the heart of every American soldier, a conviction built from professional standards, culture, and ideals. It teaches soldiers to always obey the leadership of the civilian government. Whether at the Army's West Point, the Navy's Annapolis Academy, or the Air Force's Colorado Springs Academy, these world-class military academies teach their cadets far more than just tactics and strategy. They deeply ingrain the concept of civilian control into the mind of every cadet. Cadets are repeatedly taught that a soldier's duty is not to make policy, but to execute the policies set by elected civilian leaders. The military's role is to serve the nation, not to rule the nation. This concept of professionalism is the bedrock of American military culture. From the lowest private to the highest-ranking general, American service members, at the start of their careers, must all take an oath. This oath is critically important. Every word carries weight. The object of their sworn allegiance is not a specific president, general, or any political party, but to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The phrase, enemies, domestic, is particularly key. It clearly communicates that even if someone within the country, even a high-ranking government official, tries to violate the Constitution, the military's duty is to defend the Constitution, not to obey that person. This oath defines the military as an apolitical guardian of the Constitution. Deep in American culture is rooted the idea of American exceptionalism, the belief that America is different from any other country in the world, that it is a special entity founded on the principles of liberty, democracy, and the rule of law. Under this belief, a military coup is not just a simple political change, It is a betrayal of the core spirit that defines America. This cultural identity is also deeply ingrained in the military psyche, making them view a coup as an unthinkable and near treasonous act. Furthermore, the U.S. military itself is a highly diverse institution. Service members come from all social classes, races, religions, and political affiliations. This diversity prevents the formation of a single, homogeneous group within the military, a type of group that often easily sees itself as the nation's sole guardian. It is these soft factors of culture and ideals that form the intangible force that binds the U.S. military firmly within the constitutional framework. America's system of civilian control is certainly strong, but this does not mean that between civilian leaders and military generals there have never been conflicts or disagreements. In fact, American history is full of such tense moments. But every conflict was ultimately resolved within the constitutional framework, and not through the barrel of a gun. During the Civil War, the Union Army's commanding general, George McClellan, was both a brilliant organizer and a hesitant battlefield commander. He strongly criticized President Lincoln's war strategy, often reluctant to directly execute the president's orders, and even privately viewing Lincoln as an incompetent leader and aspiring to compete with Lincoln for the presidency. But even so, McClellan never thought of using the army against the Washington government. In the end, Lincoln used his constitutional authority to relieve McClellan of his command. This event proved that even in the most intense moments of war, the decision of the elected civilian leader still held ultimate authority. During the Korean War, Douglas MacArthur publicly opposed President Truman's policy of limiting the scale of the war, advocating for expanding the war and even proposing nuclear strikes against China. He also wrote letters to congressmen and made statements to the media to publicly criticize the president's policies. This was undoubtedly a direct challenge to the commander-in-chief's authority. In April 1951, Truman made a brave and controversial decision to relieve this most popular general in America of his command. Truman stated at the time, "I fired him because he violated the nation's constitution. I cannot allow a theater commander to determine America's foreign policy." This incident is the most powerful and profound example of America's principle of civilian control. It proved that no matter how popular a general is, how heroic, he must obey the authority of the law. In more recent history, similar examples are not uncommon. During the Vietnam War, the Pentagon and the Johnson administration had serious disagreements. During the Afghanistan War, General Stanley McChrystal was forced to resign after criticizing Obama administration officials in Rolling Stone magazine. And just recently, in the final days of President Donald Trump's term, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, raised questions about the constitutional legality of some of the president's decisions and took steps to reinforce controls over nuclear weapons. These incidents all show the relationship between civilians and the military is not always harmonious. But all disagreements are ultimately resolved through political and constitutional processes, not by a coup. America's historical and structural barriers against coups are undoubtedly strong. But modern America in the 21st century is facing a series of new challenges. These challenges have renewed doubts about the stability of those barriers. Today's America is experiencing an unprecedented social and political division. The divide between Democrats and Republicans has long surpassed policy differences, evolving into a deep cultural and ideological conflict. This severe division has also permeated the military. Soldiers are ordinary people too. They also have their own political beliefs. When the nation's political leaders view each other as enemies and question the legitimacy of democratic processes, it becomes increasingly difficult for the military to remain apolitical. In recent years, trust among the American public and political leaders in democratic institutions like the electoral system, the judiciary, and the media has plummeted. This erosion of trust is creating a dangerous vacuum. When the public and leaders no longer trust democratic institutions, they may turn to undemocratic solutions, and military intervention is one of them. When the military becomes deeply tied to a specific political party, it will be difficult for it to remain neutral when the other party is in power. And this will completely destroy the fragile balance of power between civilians and the military. At the same time, The Pentagon has also acknowledged that the military is facing problems with infiltration by white supremacists and other extremist groups. These groups are not loyal to the U.S. Constitution, but are loyal to specific racist or authoritarian ideologies. Although the number of such groups is currently small, their existence poses a serious threat to the military's unity and discipline. The January 6, 2021, U.S. Capitol riot was a direct assault on America's democratic system. Among the crowd participating in the riot were many former military personnel, veterans, and even a few active duty service members. Although this was not a military coup, and military leadership quickly condemned the event, it exposed the depth of America's political division and that some members of the military can also be influenced by extremist ideologies. Of course, these challenges do not mean that America is on the verge of a military coup. But they clearly indicate that the historical and cultural foundations that have long protected American democracy are no longer as indestructible as they once were.